My name is Janelle Kendall. I'm the Stearns County Attorney. We have been getting so many calls about how to get a court facility dog into county attorneys' offices in the state of Minnesota, and maybe even more importantly, how to get them into court. Nova has been transformational for some of our victims of crime. You've all seen it. These victims get on the stand, they can't talk about what happened to them, they've got the bad guy sitting right there. This is complicated, and so we did the research. It's going to take a little while, but you can do it too. We're going to help you understand how you go about applying for one of these dogs, what the reality is going to be when it comes into your office. You're going to need to find a handler, and how are you going to pay for it? It's actually not all that complicated. So we're going to lay out all those steps for you, give you all the information that you can so that we can get more of these dogs in the state of Minnesota helping our victims of crime. Here we go.
Nova is a 7-year-old golden retriever. She came from Helping Paws in Hopkins, Minnesota. Helping Paws trains dogs for people who have physical disabilities, veterans and first responders with PTSD, and facility dogs like Nova. A facility dog is an animal that is trained specifically to work with individuals that I tell her to work with, to provide them comfort and support while we're meeting with them and during trial.
I was at a meeting of the National District Attorneys Association, and as we were sitting around at dinner one night talking about victim issues, and obviously in the criminal justice system we have to make sure that everything is fair and right and disclosed to the defense, but there was a lot less attention paid to victims, and we're talking about this, and it turned out that everyone around the table had a facility dog in their office. I had never heard of such a thing being actually allowed in court. And in most of those offices, most prosecutors' offices are actually 2 to 5 lawyers around the nation, and these were all small offices. So the county attorney was the person who had the dog, lived with the dog, handled the dog, did all these things. And in an office of our size, we needed someone that was dedicated to nothing but victim assistance full-time.
She lives with me when we're not at work. She comes to work with me when I go to work. She has a kennel in my office where she can just hang out if she needs to.
So a community member approached us and said, well, actually I work with Helping Paws and I have a dog that I'm in training. Could I bring the dog down to the courthouse as part of her training process? And that started it all, because once we had that dog in the courthouse for training purposes and people understood what an impact she could have, that was hugely helpful with the bench. So we started it very slowly, very carefully, just by letting a dog that we had no reason to believe would ever end up with us. And that was actually Nova's sister, Nori, who's now placed with the Ramsey County Attorney's Office.
So we had to submit a letter of interest to Helping Paws. Then we had some phone interviews. Then Helping Paws came and did a site visit, which included my home. And then after that, we went through the matching process. After we were matched, then, when Nova was ready to be placed, I went to a week-long intense training down at Helping Paws facility.
I had to go through human resources and talk about, is this going to be an issue with other employees in the county? What about allergies, things like that? And they were just amazingly supportive of this, looking at it as what would a service dog be allowed to do, and also looking at the sheriff's canines. So the idea that the dog would become an employee of the county was not foreign because of the sheriff's bloodhounds and shepherds. Obviously those dogs are for a completely different purpose and can cause a lot more challenges than our little Nova. But we went through the entire process that you would go through for any county agency to get a dog, but with very practical talking to the people who are doing it now in other states so that we didn't have to repeat any of the mistakes that they might have made earlier in the process.
The rules are very strict. It's intense. It's hard when you have family, little kids that really like dogs, such as my family, to understand that they can't feed her, they can't take her outside, they can't do the things that they want to do with her, because during the first 6 months it's a very intense process of, now she needs to bond with me. She needs to know that I'm her person, that I'm the one that's going to feed her and fulfill her basic needs that she needs. But that also makes us a better team.
I had no idea there were going to be so many restrictions on what she could do in the office, that this bonding process was such a big deal. And that was what the other people that I talked to around the country said, be careful, this isn't the office pet. If they know that somebody's going to give it snacks, then every time that person walks by, it's still a dog, no matter how well trained it is. So it's going to figure out, oh, that person will give me snacks, that person will not follow the rules, it'll know. So before we ever even got a dog, we were aware of the significant restrictions because I saw it in other offices.
And everybody at our office loves dogs too, but there too they can't, hi Nova, they can't talk to her, they can't look at her, they can't give her treats, there's no playing, we don't take the best off at work. So for the first, 6 months, it was tough. But then after I felt like we were really solid in our bond, then at work I would take her vest off and send an email, hey, Nova's in the Mississippi room if you want to come and hang out with her, because people know, okay, if Nova's vest is off, she's not working. And I do give her a break because she does soak in that trauma that she's hearing, and the victims definitely pass off the stress to her.
Funding for Nova comes from our forfeiture funds. Literally the money that the criminals pay as part of their process going through the court system is how we fund Nova. But she came to us through an application process that was already paid for. Helping Paws has private donors, they have other ways to fund. This is like a $50,000 dog walking in the door. So we wouldn't have had that kind of funding to be able to pay for Nova and her training. That's the application process that makes sure that everyone who has funded it up until that point, that she is able to actually do her job. So first you apply and you get a dog that someone else has paid for the training. And then for us, it's been forfeiture funds. Except for the handler's salary, there is in addition to a county employee's salary for having a 24/7, 365 responsibility like a dog. I thought that was going to be a big deal. HR is like, no, the sheriff's office has dogs and we have a specific process that we use with their union. Your county board has to approve it, but ultimately your HR department will know what are the rules for bringing this dog into the building. It helps that service dogs are by law required to be allowed into the building. I think that was a big step that we didn't have to get over. But as Kelly has said, she's not just a service dog. She's way more than that. So the cost hasn't been a big deal because the county was supportive of the salary piece for a dog handler. We're already familiar with that. So if your sheriff's office has a canine, your HR and county board have already been there, done that.
The research on using a facility dog in the courtroom is not extensive in that specific setting, but the benefits of having a dog in traumatic situations has research dating back into the 80s. It's very well established at this point through research that the presence of a dog when a person is experiencing a traumatic event is instrumental in helping lower their stress levels, reducing their heart rate, helping them cope with what they are experiencing at that time.
We see victims in a group of strangers in a jury trial sometimes literally shut down. And literally the way the brain processes trauma, they might not be able to articulate accurately and fully what happens in that scenario. So having this additional tool to allow any witness to fully and fairly testify, it's a big legal deal. So we need to make sure that we do this right and that we followed all the procedures, because once it's there, just like having a support person in the courtroom, that's allowed, but even that, once upon a time 20 years ago, was a process, not an event, with the legislature and with the Supreme Court. So all the rules that have to go into that, of what happens in a courtroom, absolutely swirl around everything involving Nova.
So her job is to meet with victims and witnesses that we're meeting with in preparation for charging a case or deciding not to charge a case, preparing for trial. Basically, she is just there to provide comfort to the victims and the witnesses that we are meeting with. Sometimes those meetings and conversations can be very difficult. So she's just there as a source of comfort to the people that we're meeting with. From what I was seeing nationwide, it looks like these dogs are mostly used in cases where there's a child victim. There have been a couple of cases where there were adult victims. One of the adults was a disabled adult, and that was upheld on appeal. One of the cases involved an adult who had been sexually assaulted. That case was reversed on appeal. We don't want that. We don't want to make that mistake. These are, in my opinion, some of the most important cases that will ever go to trial. Putting a victim up there and having them testify about being sexually assaulted is not something you want to make them do twice if you can avoid it at all. So the goal is to get them through this with a secure conviction, but in a way that is as least traumatic to them as possible, and also in a way that they can tell their story in a way that's thorough and accurate and truthful.
The week after Nova came to work was the first time she worked with a victim. In that situation, the attorney asked if Nova could be present during that meeting. We knew it was going to be a difficult meeting for the victim. She had been sexually assaulted and she just needed a little extra support. We were getting ready for trial, and so we had to talk facts, and that's usually always really hard. You know, these people don't know us, we're strangers, and to have to come and say the horrible things that they've endured to strangers is really uncomfortable. So the attorney, the person that does my job at the office, asked the victim if they were okay having Nova, and she said yes. So we just introduced ourselves and sat in the meeting, and Nova sat at her feet the whole time, and the victim was able to pet her while she was talking to the attorney about the case.
Early on in a case, it might be apparent immediately that a certain victim is going to potentially benefit from the presence of having Nova in some of those meetings. So whether it's one of Kelly's cases, who is Nova's handler, whether it's a different paralegal's case, that is dependent on how the process starts. Sometimes Kelly's already involved, or another paralegal might reach out to Kelly to ask if she can sit in with Nova during a meeting with a victim or a witness. And if Kelly's available, she'll make sure that she can be there to be a part of that meeting as well, just to bring Nova in. So sometimes we might introduce the idea to a victim who's having a hard time and ask them if that's something that they would be interested in, or something that would be helpful. The word is starting to spread that we have Nova, so sometimes they ask us if Nova can be there.
And so to have something else there to help her to control the emotions, to control the thought press, just to bring it all down so that we can talk fully and fairly about what really happened, this is a huge deal. And that isn't lost on any defense attorney. So the judges have to have that criteria to decide. But this is a big step for victim rights in the state of Minnesota. That's why we did it.
Now that Nova's gotten media attention, she's actually been requested by victims. They know we have her. So if she's requested, if we think it's going to be beneficial, we offer it. So she's been involved in domestic assault cases. She's worked with survivors of homicide. She's worked with attempted murder victims. She has worked with sexual assault victims. You name it, whenever she's needed or requested, she's available.
The process we went through to get Nova in the courtroom was very long. As soon as I knew that we were going to be getting a facility dog in our office, I buckled down and started looking at the research, trying to understand what benefit this could have to our victims. And then I also started looking at the case law nationwide to see what offices in other states have done with this. There's not a ton. There's about 20 cases nationwide that have dealt with a facility dog in the courtroom. I read those cases in depth to try to get a good understanding of what went right, what went wrong, and tried to make sure that once we were ready to implement this in one of our cases, that we would do it right.
It's a battle to get dogs into the courtroom because we have to ensure that the constitutional rights of the person who's charged with the crime are being met. And there's so many things that could distract that process, especially when you're talking about a jury trial with people you pull in off the street trying to decide who to believe. There are so many rules and regulations about what can happen in a criminal courtroom, especially during a jury trial. So introducing a dog on behalf of the biggest, most important witness at trial could be a factor to everything else that happens in the trial. So we really had to make sure we were on solid ground, that the judge understood that, the judge has complete control to say this is going to happen or it's not. So we did a lot of legal work to make sure that the courtroom environment is still constitutionally sound, everything's happening that needs to happen for the defendant's rights to be protected, but this was a way for the victims to be able to tell everything.
It was a lot of research and a lot of just kind of waiting for the right case. Some of the cases nationwide have different standards in terms of when a dog should be used in the courtroom, whether it should be a necessity, whether we think that this victim cannot possibly take the stand and testify unless we can establish that it cannot be done without a dog. Other states are saying, if the child says they want the dog and they think it might help, then that's good enough for us. We don't really know what Minnesota is going to do, and we tried to make sure that we were cautious in this approach in Minnesota. So we waited for the right case. We waited for a case that had a child victim, and obviously all child victims, when they're getting ready to testify, are going to be scared and nervous. We were looking for something that was more than that. And it took 6 years.
We didn't want to just do this willy-nilly. We wanted to make sure that we found the appropriate case to approach the court to ask if Nova could be in the witness stand, because this has never been done in Minnesota. So we, actually in this specific situation, the social worker had reached out to me and said, is there any accommodations that we can make for this victim? In this particular case, it was a daughter having to testify against her father who had been sexually assaulting her for years. And the social worker said, is there any accommodations that we can make for her? She's so nervous and scared to have to go to court. And so I talked to the prosecuting attorney, Jamie Reinschmidt, and I said, I think we have our first case. So we spoke with the victim and asked her if she thought having Nova with her during her testimony would help her. And after getting confirmation from her, then Jamie filed the motions that she needed to file with court.
And so I compiled all of that research that I had been doing for many years, the legal authority nationwide, the psychology that backs why this is helpful to victims and why we want to do it here, and presented all of that in a legal memorandum. And then I attached several hundreds of pages of research studies that show that this is helpful to victims, that this particular victim needs it, and that there is a structure in place that we can implement to make this so that it does not prejudice the defense. And then obviously also we wanted to include in that all of Nova's qualifications, to make sure the court and the defense understood that we're not just taking the dog off the street and asking the court to let this dog sit up at the witness stand with the victim. This is a dog that's highly trained, who we have experience with in witness meetings. She's been in the courtroom. She can sit for hours and hours and be completely unobstructive and not disrupt the proceedings. She's going to make the proceedings go quicker. We're not going to have to take as many breaks. I just put it all out there for the judge. We wanted to make it as easy as possible for this judge to say yes, and I think we accomplished that.
So we came into the courtroom outside the presence of the jury, got Nova and the victims situated in the witness stand. The jury came in, she testified, and then we left outside the presence of the jury again. So the jury left after she was done testifying, and we left.
The defendant was sentenced, so the case went to trial last April, about a year ago, and he was sentenced, and the defense has filed a appeal for his case. And as expected, he's appealing the use of the facility dog in the trial. They're arguing that it was prejudicial to the defense, which is no surprise. We were very prepared for that argument leading up to our first, request to have the dog in the courtroom, which is why we structured the trial the way that we did in terms of where Nova was during the trial and what the jury knew about her being in there. We think the record is very detailed to make sure that the appellate court knows exactly what happened in that courtroom with the facility dog, and we'll be able to make a very knowledgeable, they'll have all the information that they need when they're going to make that decision.
In terms of the legal foundation for this, we chose to go down the what happens in the courtroom route, which is then controlled by the judge, which is then controlled by the facts and details of the case. Rather than going to the legislature and trying to get a blanket rule that applies, that can be very tough on victim-related issues in Minnesota. And candidly, understanding that this is for other prosecutors in Minnesota, we know. And yet, the criminal justice system is set up around the constitutional rights of the defendant. We get that. But at the same time, if you want your victim to be able to get through the traumatic experience of getting all the facts out in front of the judge, in front of the jury, this is simply a tool in that process. So you can either go down the legislative route or you can go down the judicial route. And we decided to do that just because of the history with the legislature. We didn't expect that that would be successful or didn't know how many years that would take.
On that specific case, I want to see the Court of Appeals come down with a decision that says that this was not prejudicial to the defense and that he had a fair trial. Long term, I would love to see a future where these facility dogs are used in cases not only in Minnesota but nationwide for victims and witnesses, really anybody. It's very stressful for anybody to testify in a trial, but especially for victims and especially child victims. I would love to see a future where it's not so big of an ask to allow a victim, whether it's a child or an adult, to have the use of a facility dog on the witness stand with them when they're testifying at a trial.
So it's a long process. We want to make sure that we do it right, and other counties are jumping forward to say we want to do that too, and we're literally asking, can we let this one get through the court system first? Let's establish some ground rules so that when anyone else does it, that again, the last thing we want to happen is a victim has to go through this twice because an appellate court finds that all of the constitutional guarantees were not met. What we've seen since Nova's been in the office is exactly the transformation that we hoped. People are now asking for her. People can, even in the pretrial interviews, be able to talk about some of these things, because every time they have to relive the trauma, whether it's in our office, on the witness stand, when they're talking to law enforcement, these are all just continuing to recreate the pain and suffering, literally, that causes us to be interacting with them at all. So she's used in a lot of different cases now where people are experiencing trauma through no fault of their own by being victims of crime.
Our office has used Nova hundreds of times. And it not just in the witness stand, she's been in the witness stand twice, but when we're doing pre-charge meetings, when we're doing pre-trial meetings, when we're doing no-act meetings, she's there.
I have seen, with the presence of Nova, the opportunity for a victim who is starting to feel that way to Nova. She's so intuitive. She will just, put her head on that person's lap or nudge their hand just as a little like, hey, I'm here. And I've seen victims and witnesses, start to pet Nova when they're in that disassociative state. And it just kind of gives them a sense of being grounded again. And, they're not thinking about this and the impact that Nova has, but you can see it happen right in front of you. And all of a sudden that person is, petting Nova, and they're taking a moment to kind of calm down and think, and they take a deep breath, and then all of a sudden they're back with you and they're able to communicate with you again, to listen to your question, to think about what the answer is, and then to provide a detailed account of what information it is you're trying to get from them.
The focus of my time as a prosecutor, way back to 30 years now, has been victims and allowing victims to get to a place where they can tell truthfully and fully what happened. And I've seen so many times in my personal experience trying child abuse cases, sexual assault cases, domestic violence cases, that once you're sitting in front of the person who did this to you, which by definition is how this works, it's so overwhelming. So for 30 years, looking for a way to somehow make that less overwhelming in every aspect of what we do, this was the best tool we've seen so far, and we knew it was going to be an uphill battle, but I just can't think of a better use of our time than getting victims to a place that they can actually tell what happened, so that at least that portion of their life, the accountability part, can happen. The witness stand part is this much of what happened to them, but how they feel about it that day and going forward, there's no better use of my time.
There is nothing more satisfying than putting in the work to accomplish this and then seeing it play out right before your eyes in the way that you wanted it to. I was talking earlier about how the victim in this case had a moment of, she was struggling and getting stressed and shutting down, and then you saw the change in her when Nova nudged her and started saying to her, "I'm here. If you need help getting through this, here I am." And like I said, she took a deep breath and just kind of settled in and thought for a moment, regrouped, and then just laid it all out there. And in the moment while she's on the witness stand and you're seeing her have the opportunity to provide all of that information that you need, it's interesting to reflect back on how that might have gone differently without Nova there.
People have been asking me, how do we go about getting one of these? First, make sure that you have someone in your office that is willing to do this. Make sure that in the grand scheme of county employment, that your HR people are on board with this. So get that foundation laid, because if you don't have that foundation, you can go out and find a dog, but if it's not going to be allowed in your county, it's not going to do you any good. So first, get your handler, figure out how you're going to pay for this and how you're going to work it into your work system, and then approach one of the groups that trains these dogs. Helping Paws has been humongously helpful to us. They understand that we're a matter of first impression getting this into the courts, so they've worked with us on what we can and cannot say publicly. But first, figure out who's going to handle it, figure out how you're going to pay for it, and that does not need to be that big a deal. Really not a factor at the end of the day. And then start your application process and understand that your handler is going to have to go through personal background checks. These people are going to be out in their home. It's a very detailed process, but if you're committed to getting that dog into court at the end of time, tell the people that, and then they will send you, the interview process of pairing the dog will be different if they know that this is what you're up to. This isn't visiting in nursing homes, this isn't just in the office. This is going to be a very formal process. So if that's your intent with the dog, is to get it on the witness stand, then think about that from the moment you apply.
If you're considering getting a facility dog, do it. It makes the world a difference in your cases. We've been so successful in prosecuting some cases that I don't think we would have been as successful if we didn't have Nova. That case that we had where Nova was in the witness stand with the victim, that victim was on the stand for 5 hours, and it was awful. And I do not think she would have had the stamina to do that if she didn't have Nova.
So what we would hope would happen going forward is that more offices are going to get this, that this is going to be allowed in court, and I think you'll see it grow exponentially at that point. But we're seeing now dogs have been with law enforcement for these same purposes for quite some time. It's the step of getting it into the courtroom that I think will have it in many offices around the state. We've got a good core of prosecutors across the country and across the state right now, and people are very much paying attention to this.
My biggest advice to somebody who is considering getting a facility dog at their office is to keep doing your research. This is a good start. I found it very helpful to read some of the case law nationwide. Like I said, there's only about 20 cases nationwide, so it doesn't take a long time to get through them. And if you go look at the courthousedogs.org website, they outline for you all of the case law that's out there in the country. And they provide summaries, so you can see what the facts were of that case, what the court's ruling was, and a little description of why. It's a very good start in terms of educating yourself on what not to do and what you should do. I'd also suggest taking a look at the motion that I filed with the court, which outlined the jury instructions that we proposed, the procedure for getting the dog on and off the witness stand out of the presence of the jury, anticipating arguments that the defense will make about prejudice. There's information in there about studies that have been, or a study that has been done that shows that the presence of a facility dog in a courtroom during a trial is not more prejudicial than some of the other things that we already do for victims, such as letting them bring a comfort item up to the witness stand, like a blanket or a toy or a fidget. It's not more prejudicial than having a support person in the courtroom. There are tremendous benefits to using a facility dog over some of those other things.
County attorneys, if you're thinking about doing this, please reach out to us. Please be aware, and I'm sure you are, that there's going to be a pretrial and a litigation process to get this dog into the courtroom. I would recommend that you start just getting the dog in your office, getting the dog used to dealing with these type of matters so that you can have meaningful conversations with your victims. Because let's be honest, when you get that call that the prosecutor wants you to come in and now we're going to talk about what's going to happen at trial, right there, this becomes a very valuable tool to have. So do it now. Reach out to us. All the links are going to be here at the end of the video so you know where to go to get one of these dogs and how to go about it. But just start the process now, because it's probably going to take you a few years. I mean, it took us like 6 from the time we first started talking about it, doing it. But prosecutors, this is going to help your victims. It's going to, guaranteed. So start the process now, figure out how you're going to pay for it. We'll hopefully pave the way here with the courts. But even if your dog never gets into court, what that dog can do for the victims that you interact with daily, we really believe is a valuable tool, and we'll do anything we can to help you with that process.